But I agree we can apply that to Jesus, and that's going to make the Jesus story just as ridiculous and incoherent as this one. Hey folks, welcome to Joel Reads Bible. I'm Joel and I read Bibles so that you don't have to. And this is one of those super special sexy recap episodes. That's right, it's super sexy. We're going to be recapping Numbers 1 through 10. That's right, the first 10 chapters of Numbers. What's happened? What happened in the first 10 chapters of Numbers? And the answer is a whole lot of preamble. That's what I'm getting from it. I'm getting a whole lot of setting up the world that we're going to explore, which we've kind of been doing since Genesis, I think. Genesis, the world was created, that's fine, and then we kind of had preamble stories. Luckily, they were stories, which got us to slavery in Egypt and the Exodus story. And that story is a focal point. And I think we're going to see throughout this whole entire book that story is a focal point, even though we do mention other things that have happened, like the fall and that kind of thing eventually. That Exodus thing, that's what really underpins a lot of these Jewish traditions and things like that, it seems. I'm just thinking about the Passover and the things about the firstborn. And then I guess the tabernacle probably has something to do with this. At least that's what God gives Moses on Mount Sinai. So we're really just building out the culture of the ancient Hebrews in these, I'll say, preliminary texts, it seems to me. And so Numbers is more of that. It's less about story, and it's not even that much about laws. It's more about like, here we are now. We're going to start setting out into the wilderness of Sinai, or just like, I guess, the wilderness, the 40-year sort of marching around the desert. And this is what we've got. This is the group of people. This is the tabernacle. These are the people who take down the tabernacle and all this kind of thing. So it really does feel like a prologue to the actual stories that we're going to read, which is really boring. And unfortunately, we have to read it because it's Joel Reads Bible and we're reading the whole entire Bible. But hopefully, eventually, it will get so much better and so much more interesting. But we're going to go over the 10 chapters, and there were a few things that I missed when I read it originally. Hopefully, this doesn't go too long. I've done some pretty long recap episodes. This probably won't be one of them because I really nailed it this time. I didn't really miss that much in the chapters, or maybe there just wasn't that much to miss. But let's get right into it. So starting with Numbers chapter 1. What you'll notice in the first few chapters of Numbers is you get these censuses of all the different people that are in this group. And of course, they're all men. It's just the number of men. And on the surface, you might go, oh, that's really misogynistic. They don't care about women. Obviously, the Bible doesn't care about women. Women are certainly always subjugated, their property. They're not actual real like human beings or anything like that. What's important to note here is that these are soldiers. That's why we're only mentioning the men. These are fighting men. They're of a certain age where they can go out into battle and destroy other nations. This is describing an army. This is a war god that's saying, who do we have to kill other people? This is all about conquest and those types of things. You might say Yahweh's not a war god. Yahweh is a God of love. He loved the whole world. These are things that like seem so counterintuitive to this group of people on the war path, just going and annihilating anyone else that isn't them, to move into their land, to take their people as slaves. That's all they're doing. This is the plan. Maybe there's something where it's like, we want to make families and we want to have farms and things like that. I think there is kind of a hint of that in Leviticus where God is saying, if you don't do these things, I'm going to make you eat your children and you're not going to have any harvests and all of those things. So obviously, family, or at least making children and having farms and livestock is important to these people. Living those peaceful ways are important to these people. But what's really, really important in these particular texts is going out and annihilating all the other nations. And I don't know how true this is. These lists of like specific amounts of people, I mean, they're rounded to the nearest 10 or whatever. But I think these descriptions make it seem like, oh, maybe this was true. Maybe there was this group of people, except that these stories and this book was compiled around the time of the Babylonian exile, I believe. So was this the population of those people that were involved in that moment in history? Or is it just fictional? Is it just trying to build it up so that it seems true? I don't know why we have to read these boring lists of numbers. Maybe it is simply fleshing out the world. It's world building. And those things were important at the time, so they just like wrote all of that out. But it is a lot of annoying detail. But at the heart of it, it is how many men do we have to go into war? And then we went to Numbers chapter 2, and literally nothing happened. It was more just numbers of people, which you are going to expect because it's the book of Numbers. So what do you want? And then we read Numbers chapter 3. So I don't know which chapter I really spoke to this, but it's the idea that in the beginning of Numbers, we get that the Hebrews were in the wilderness of Sinai for 2 years and some odd months. And I was like, oh, are they already wandering around the wilderness of Sinai? The cloud is going up and they're picking up the tabernacle and they're going for their walk and then they're stopping, but they're just like in the wilderness of Sinai. I don't know how big the wilderness of Sinai is, but at the time of reading it, I was like, this doesn't seem to be in order because they would have already known how they're supposed to move if they're already getting up and moving. But I think I misread that. I think that they were in the wilderness of Sinai, but they weren't wandering yet. They were still at the base of Mount Sinai. It had just kind of changed the wording from base of Mount Sinai, base of Mount Horeb, base of Mount Sinai to the wilderness of Sinai. So that was what confused me, I think. I thought in Leviticus they may have already been wandering. It turns out I think Moses was still there encamped at the base of Mount Sinai. God was coming to him in his tent with Joshua. Nothing salacious happening there. And then they hung out there for like 2+ years, got all the rules, got all the laws that they needed. Not all of them. They're going to get more in Deuteronomy, I believe. But the point is they haven't gone anywhere. That was a mistake that I made. I think it was a misreading. I'll admit that, by the way. And a lot of people go, you're an idiot, you don't know what you're doing, blah, blah. I'm reading the Bible, I'm checking into it, I'm trying to make sense of it. And when I make a mistake, and I've made a few mistakes, I've misread a few things. And sometimes it's a translation problem, but I'm not reading 6 translations and I don't know the original Hebrew. That's a limited responsibility on my part. God, if he does exist, has written this book. He wants to reveal himself through it, allegedly. If he was a little bit more, I don't know, hands-on, or if he cared a little bit more, he would be protecting all the different translations and he would make sure that his word made sense and was coherent and we could understand it. I'm doing my best. I'm not sitting here purposely misunderstanding it. Anyway, this one's kind of superficial. I didn't know if they had left yet. I thought it was a bit contradictory, but it turns out they're probably still just waiting at the base of Mount Sinai. In Numbers chapter 3, we also get this really cool name, Mushi, and I just wanted to highlight that because I read it and I was like, Mushi, that's kind of a cool name for someone. If I had a kid, I might name them Mushi. And then we have a description of which people are going to do what job when building the tabernacle. And this is really strange because it seems like too many people. And I'm kind of tempted, now of course I can never do this, but I wish that Hollywood would do this thing where they get thousands of extras, right? Just get all the people that are described there. Let's choreograph them building the tabernacle. I think that'd be an impossible task. It's too many people. There'd be so many people crammed in there trying to build not that big of a tabernacle. They have to just all fall all over each other trying to build it. I think it would be absolute chaos and bedlam. It's too many people. And I would believe in God if he made things himself. If he was here And he was just like showing, like the things would kind of build themselves, or maybe it would look like nature. There'd be caves and things like that, like something that would be natural but seem like so obviously designed. And that was where they worship. And like maybe rocks would like block a doorway, and then they'd slide open when he wants people to go into the Holy of Holies, and then slide closed. And nobody would know how that happens. Like that wouldn't be something that there's a lever anywhere. It would be literally God doing it. Like that would be evidence, right? Then we would know that God probably does exist. But right now we have him saying, do something, and have way too many people doing it. He doesn't even logistically have a good idea of how this should be done. And I mean, I could be corrected. If you guys think that thousands of people, like we're literally thousands of people trying to make this tabernacle is a good idea, jump in the comments, let me hear it. But when I was reading, I was like, I think that's too many people. So in Numbers chapter 4, we get this counting of the Levites now. And I was critical because earlier in the other chapters, it said, don't do a census on the Levites. We don't want you to, don't count any of the Levites. But then all of a sudden he's like, we're going to do a census on the Levites. I'm like, oh my goodness, obvious contradictions. But it's not necessarily a contradiction. Again, I'm not going to just assume contradiction every time and push for contradiction. He didn't want the Levites counted at that time. He wanted the Levites counted on their own, right? We're going to count the tribe of Levi as its own special thing. And he says, don't count them amongst the other children of Israel because they're special. They're entirely set apart. This is part of my theory that the Levites are running a scam. Now, it's a pretty good theory because you can read all the things that the Levites get. I don't know if there's a downside to this stuff, except that they kind of have to do it. They're kind of slaves to this thing. But the thing that they're a slave to is just being fed by the children of Israel, right? And being able to take places like real estate and all of these perks. It seems almost entirely perks, if I'm honest. So I don't know how you would disprove the idea that it could be, it could be, just to sow the seeds of doubt here. It just could be that these people, like any other scammy religious leaders, I'm thinking Joseph Smith, I'm thinking the Scientology guy, whatever that guy's name, Ron L. Hubbard, I'm thinking about Jim Jones. Any of these scammers, right, they came up with some sort of doctrine handed down by God or some sort of interpretation of the book already, that they used to get things from people and to have their way with people, whatever they wanted to do. If you just go, okay, could that be what the Levites are doing? What would the argument against that be? Is there some indication that that this is it's impossible that this was just people writing it? Is there something we can see that transcends the humans at the time? Is there some way that the Levites are missing out? Maybe that they have to burn their daughter alive, like back in Leviticus 21, that God requires that they burn their daughter alive if she plays the prostitute. Yeah, I guess that's pretty harsh. You wouldn't maybe decide to do that if you were a priest. But if they kept control over their daughters, you know what I mean, and made sure that didn't happen or just never followed through on it, that kind of thing, they probably can still maintain this scam without having to worry too much about actually having to burn their daughters alive, right? So I think it's hard to find arguments against the idea that Levites were just scammers who were making a god up in order to keep their people in line and to get all the stuff that they wanted for free. I'm telling you guys, the whole Bible is a scam, and I know who is doing the scam. It's the Levitical priesthood. They were the ones that started it. And other religious leaders have jumped on board, but it was just them making up the God. So then we have Numbers 5, and Numbers 5 is generally disturbing, I will say. Now, it's difficult for Christians because this chapter flies in the face of people who are anti-abortion. And I get it. You can reframe this to say, it's not an abortion. It's not an abortion. It is, though, right? We're just going to kill the baby. By the way, we're just going to kill the baby because the mother was unfaithful, right? Not for any health risks. Some Christians might be like, okay, we'll do abortion's fine under these circumstances. If she's been cheating, is it fine to kill the baby then? Because Yahweh thinks it is. You know what I mean? And you really do have to wrestle with that as a Christian. I don't know how you get away from it. Probably special pleading or something like that, or just like closing your ears or something. If you really want to be honest with the text, because this is, again, Yahweh quoting this, saying like, this is how this is going to go. This is the setup that I have. You're going to drink water, and that water is a magical potion that if she has been unfaithful, she will miscarry. And he's doing that magically, because if she wasn't unfaithful, she won't miscarry. That's not just what the water's actually doing. That's God going like, you symbolically drink the magic potion, and I'm going to make the thing happen. Unless you think that certain types of floor dust will only have a reaction if somebody has been unfaithful, but then you'd have to be imagining that this is sort of like a weird, wacky, naturalistic thing. But I don't think you can like honestly believe that. But hey, look, if you're a Christian watching this, maybe you could believe almost anything at this point. And in Numbers 5, again, we get misogyny in the Bible. I mean, the full book is misogynistic. So God hates women. I always say that God hates women, right? And he hates women in a lot of ways. I mean, in this chapter, it's insane that he's having a woman forced to drink a magic potion, a disgusting bitter water, a floor dirt cocktail, and that's going to give her a miscarriage, which is probably going to break her heart, because the women, all they cared about was having babies, because that's the only value that anyone saw in them other than their virginity. But once that was gone, it's like, you better start creating boys. And if that's not bad enough, we get this messaging that the man is the authority of the woman. Like, this is going to happen, and we're going to do this because the man has authority over the woman. It's his authority. It says it right there in Numbers 5. Just go and read it. So if you're going to be like, no, in God's eyes, women are equal. No. What? No, they're not equal, guys. Men have authority over them. They're under men. They're property. We know that. But even if we just ignore that or try to interpret that away, the men have authority over the women, right? That's a God that's putting men above women. They're not equal. They're not here. They're there. Stop saying that. Stop lying to yourself and going, no, women, they have different roles. What? They have different roles? No, he can tell her what to do. He can tell her to drink certain water that she doesn't want to drink, to kill the baby inside her if he wants. Like, he's allowed to do that. He's her authority. That's not equality, and stop saying it is, because you're just looking stupid. So in chapter 6, we get the introduction of the Nazirite creed, if you will, or oath. I don't think they call it a creed. I think they call it an oath. And it's kind of like a cool thing. It's a cool new thing. They're like superheroes. Of course, it doesn't describe, I think, the great strength of Samson yet or anything like that, but it does say like, these are a set apart people. These are extra special people. And I think we see that in Leviticus 27 too. It's like you have the normal thing, but you can also like buy into extra levels of this cult or something like that. But these are like extra special people again. They're not drinking at all. Don't touch anything dead, They're almost like priests, but they're a little bit different. And maybe maybe the Levites were like, if people want to live kind of like us, let's give it to a hall monitor pass or something like that. Like one of these jobs that's sort of not a real thing and it's kind of busy work. We'll let these people believe they're special because they kind of do what we do, but they're nothing like us, and they don't get to do the actual stuff that we do. They're not leaders or anything, but they might be like, I want to be a Levite. It's like, you'll be a Nazirite. That's really, really special. For as long as you want, you don't have to do it for very long. Just do it for a while and enjoy it, and they'll get it out of their system, and then we can go back to being the Wizards of Oz. But these little details do more world building to make it seem fun and exciting and significant. And I think that's what like Christians and Bible scholars and like people who are into this stuff, I think it gets them excited, right? They're just like, oh, look at these cool details. What were these people? Oh, there's another mention of them over here. There's like 3 mentions and we can build an image of what this could be. And it just makes it more fun and it maybe makes it seem more real, possibly. I think that that's maybe what it's doing. But if it is just like human beings, again, it could be the priest saying, yeah, you guys can be priestly if you want. You're not us, but you can act like us a little bit. That's cool, but it's still made up. And just because there's detail and just because it seems kind of cool and we get the story of Samson and those types of things, doesn't make it any more true. Like just because we get really deep into the lore of Lord of the Rings and we get all sorts of details about the Dunedain, it doesn't mean that there's such thing as Dunedain, right? It's just a made up notion. There may have been people that called themselves Nazarite. And by the way, they could still be. People might go, I'm going to do the Nazarite oath and then just like live their life. They probably won't have superhuman strength or anything like that. They won't drink or touch dead bodies. Good for you. Well done. Like whatever. Fill your boots. Like it's just stuff that we make up to feel cool, to feel different, to feel special, and go for it. Enjoy, guys. Enjoy. I mean, it's not real, but enjoy. In Numbers chapter 7, I don't really have much on that. I have a note that reiterates what I said earlier in this video. They may not have been wandering because they were doing the census and then they were saying specifically how people would start walking and, you know, who would go first and stuff like that. That would only really matter before they start moving. So I was just wrong about them wandering. And I wrote a little note to say like that was my mistake, but I've already sort of established that. So let's move on to Numbers chapter 8. So in Numbers chapter 8, we get this idea that the Levitical priests, they're kind of slaves to God in lieu of killing all the firstborns. So God wants to kill all the firstborns. Instead of doing that, we're going to dedicate the Levites. Those people are going to be killed instead. But God says, we're not actually going to kill you. I got good news. You're just going to serve me as priests. That's the deal. So, priests and also the people that set up the tabernacle. So I just wanted to do a quick little recap and catch up from where we started to where we are. But I'm going to start with Joseph. God compels somehow Joseph's brothers, because what they meant for evil, he meant for good, to sell Joseph into slavery. So they kidnap him and they sell him into slavery, which, by the way, is against God's law, but those brothers never really get punished for it, but okay, fine. And Joseph goes to Egypt. God sends a famine, so God chooses to send the famine, and he warns Pharaoh through his dreams, which Joseph interprets, and then Joseph comes up with a great plan. This great plan turns all of Egypt into indentured servants. They all become slaves to Pharaoh. So God's great good that he was planning was everyone in Egypt becomes a slave to Pharaoh, except for Joseph's family. Joseph brings Jacob and all of his brothers to Goshen. They live there in Goshen. They become a large, huge group of Hebrews in Egypt. Eventually, all the descendants of Joseph, which God orchestrated being there in Egypt, by the way, like that was God's plan, they all become slaves. And was it something that Abraham did? Is that why? Is that why there's going to be slavery here? I'm not sure. But they all become slaves in Egypt because God orchestrated it. God made them slaves in Egypt, essentially. So the Pharaoh, he's a bad guy. He decides to turn all of those people into slaves. Yeah, God saw it coming infinity miles away. Nevertheless, maybe we can't blame him because the Pharaoh had free will. So the Pharaoh's there subjugating all the people of Israel, but God has a plan. So he sends Moses to let my people go. Wonderful. Great. Thanks, God. Super. And it almost works. After the 4th plague, Pharaoh's like, get the heck out of here. I'm done with all these plagues. And God's like, no, I want to push him more. So he hardens Pharaoh's heart. He doesn't allow Pharaoh to do it. So now God is dragging this out so that he has a good reason to kill all of Pharaoh's kids, okay? Because if he had let the people go whenever Pharaoh was like, they can go, like if he hadn't hardened Pharaoh's heart, there wouldn't be any reason to kill the firstborns. You realize that, right? Just keep that in mind. So he purposely drags out these plagues and hardens Pharaoh's heart so that it's justified to kill all of Pharaoh's firstborns, all the firstborns of Egypt, including the firstborns of the slave girl, which is never going to be justified. But whatever, he does it. You guys can say, oh, he's allowed to do it. He's God, whatever. I think that's barbaric and horrific. And so then God says, because I killed the firstborns, because I did this huge killing for you, now I want to be told I'm a good boy all the time. I want you to be reminded of this. I want everybody to celebrate me, and we're going to do that with this Passover forever, right? We're always going to do this Passover throughout all generations, forever and ever. Amen. So that you guys can go, thank you, God, for not killing us when you pushed Pharaoh to deserve having his firstborn killed. This was all your plan. It's all what you wanted. And you even infringed on Pharaoh's free will to make that happen. Don't apologetic your way out of it. That's the reality of what happened. And one way God wants to be told that he's a good boy and he did such a great job is he wants all the firstborns to be killed. He wants all the firstborns that open the womb. He wants the firstborns of the animals, and he wants the firstborn male children. He wants them killed, and you can redeem them. Okay, you are able to redeem the kids and the donkeys, right, with a lamb, or sometimes passages don't talk about redemption. Or finally, in Numbers chapter 8, you can redeem all of the firstborns of Israel by having the priests dedicated. The priests are the ones now who are dedicated to God and who God is going to kill for the thing he chose to do, for the thing he made happen. And then he's going to be merciful, I don't know if it says that, by actually just making them priests or people that build and tear down the tabernacle. That's going to be their job as his personal slave crew, his chain gang, unless, of course, there's a caveat, unless, of course, he screws up their balls in the womb, messes up their balls in some way, then he's not interested in having them hang out anymore because he loves perfect balls. But you can see what I'm saying here, right? Is because he did a famine in Egypt with Joseph, he orchestrated this whole thing where he would then have an excuse to subjugate a whole tribe of people to serve him. And I know that they're scam artists and they're making all of this up because it's actually not that bad to run this cult. I get that part of it. But all the way along the line, we have a lot of horrific things that this God is doing, forcing Pharaoh to not let the people go so he can kill all the firstborns, and then expecting people to thank him for that. That's so weird, guys. This is a horribly written story, all right? As far as literature goes, I don't think it's the best. There are just these plot holes where it's like, yeah. Let me just make it abundantly clear, though. Like, I'm coming down on the ancient Hebrews for like writing something full of plot holes. Ultimately, I don't know that they are because they don't have the same notion of God that a Christian does, right? Especially a Christian fundamentalist. So there's a world in which God isn't all-knowing, he's not all-powerful, he's impotent, he's kind of an idiot, he's a little bit inept, and he does his best, and it results in this happening. Now, I don't know how you would excuse the hardening of Pharaoh's heart and the killing of the slave girls and all those things. This God is still bad news. He's just not all good, I guess, is what you'd have to say. So in that way, it would become a compelling fiction, but certainly impossible to apply an all-good, all-loving, all-knowing God to this. It's literally impossible that would be true. I just want you guys to notice this timeline is God orchestrating something horrible, right? It's just a horrible, barbaric, awful orchestration. This is just going to continue, by the way. Like this is going to bring us to Jesus ultimately. That's why Christians talk about the Passover and all those things. Like those things are pivotal because they apply to Jesus. I think a lot of the other stories that are going to happen don't really have the significance. That's why we don't hear about them the same way. You hear a little bit about Daniel, some stuff in Isaiah. A lot of this other stuff doesn't apply to Jesus. But the Passover, that's still going to kind of be intrinsic to the Jesus character because we are looking at the firstborn element. We're also looking at the sacrificed lamb so that we can do the Passover, those types of things. All of this sort of nonsense and how contrived and arbitrary and God is in control of the whole thing, yet it's so barbaric and it doesn't make any sense. That can all apply to Jesus too. And we'll talk about that when we get to Jesus. I just want you to know that as much as this is a foreshadowing for Jesus, according to Christians, certainly not to Jewish people, but according to Christians, this is the scarlet thread that goes through the Old Testament. I think there may be something to do with typology about this maybe, but I agree we can apply that to Jesus. And that's going to make the Jesus story just as ridiculous and incoherent as this one. So then we go to Numbers chapter 9. In Numbers chapter 9, I suddenly noticed Moses used to be a super fun character. Does anyone else notice that? Like Moses used to be someone. He killed an Egyptian. He let my people go. He was arguing with God on the mountain with the burning bush. He did all sorts of things that God wanted him to do, but then I was also, I don't want to really talk that much. You know, he raised his staff to part the Red Sea. He held up his arms to beat the Amalekites. Like he was somebody. He went and got rules from God. He got angry because the people were doing the golden calf. He kind of begged God to not kill all the people because of the golden calf thing. Like he had more of a personality, but now like in Leviticus and Numbers so far, it's just, and God told Moses. Now he's just like receiving all sorts of instructions and census numbers and blah, blah, blah. It's very, very boring. He's become really just like a one-dimensional character all of a sudden. The Moses now is unrecognizable. He has really no features. He's just receiving words. To me, it feels like a skit occurring before we get into math equations. You know, like in a educational video where they're just like, oh, how many apples do you want, Mrs. Smith? Give me 7 apples, Mr. Greengrocer. No, sorry. I'm going to actually need 15. How many more apples do I need if I already have 7? You know, I think that might be what's going on because we get the cool stories and the fun adventures, and then it's just like boring, fact, census. You know, and it's like Moses isn't doing anything anymore. He's just like, yeah, I guess we do abortions. I guess if women were cheating, they do abortions. I don't know. I'm not involved really. So this goes back to my theory of the object lessons that happen in the Bible that show us why we should be living up to certain laws and that kind of thing. I think that that's pretty consistent throughout these stories. And then we get to Numbers chapter 10. Moses actually gets to do some more dialogue, which is neat. And he talks to Hobab and he goes, Hobab, you got to stick around. And Hobab is his brother-in-law. And he's like, you got to stay around. You got such great eyes. And Hobab's like, I don't know if I want to. And he's like, please, we'll give you everything that we get. You'll be one of us. Now, I don't know if Hobab's character shows up again. I don't know if he's going to be a main character, if there's like a reason for him. Like if he's part of the story, and if his character is necessary in some way, I'm going to be surprised, but also like, cool. We have an introduction to Hobab here. But if he's not, my guess would be, as I said just 2 seconds ago, he exists as an object lesson where it's like, sometimes we'll want foreigners to live with us because they may have talents that we don't have. Like they may be really good at seeing. They may be better seers. So they in a head better, they got better eye visions. So we are actually going to keep them on board. So guys, let these foreigners live among you and let them eat Passover now all of a sudden, even though before we said we weren't going to do that, but now we are going to do that. Maybe that's what's happening, but I could be pleasantly surprised where Hobab becomes like an unsuspected hero. You know, he's just there with like his hawk eyes and he's going to see everything. And it's like, and Hobab saw, there they were, the Amalekites coming over the hill. Oh, we got to destroy them. You know, something fun like that, or the Philistines or something. But anyway, that's our Numbers recap. We did it. We got through the first 10 chapters. They were a slog. I can't wait until we get into more fun story stuff in the Bible. And it's going to happen, okay? And there's going to be a lot of like horrific things, even in Numbers. So please, don't leave. Don't leave me. Subscribe, like the video, leave a comment. You know you want to. Overall, though, we're doing the world building in these first 10 chapters. We're just starting out, okay? And we've been doing, I know you guys are like, we've been doing that forever. Yes, we had to build the tabernacle. We had to be told how to build the tabernacle. Then we had to actually build the tabernacle. Then we had to tell you how we're going to continue to build and tear down the tabernacle, okay? This is all world building, guys, because once we get into like Judges or other books, like maybe Joshua, they'll just shut up about all of that stuff. We won't need to know that stuff anymore. We'll have the picture in our minds and we'll be able to, you know, imagine them do the thing because we read all about the blue and scarlet and gold tabernacle stuff. So we know all about that. So, you know, be patient, but also know that like maybe this stuff will come up. Maybe it's important to know that. Maybe the Urim and the Thummim will come up and be important. Maybe there's going to be a time where, you know, a priest is fighting in the battle and someone stabs him, but it hits one of the stones on his breastplate thing, and you wouldn't have known about that unless it had been in Exodus, right, and described. So we need that excruciating detail so that when we get to the great story where the priests fight, I doubt that's going to be in there. But hey, here's hoping, right? Guys, again, thanks for joining me. Thanks for joining as members. I have quite a few members of the channel now. I appreciate the support. These videos do take me hours of recording, not just like recording and reading, but then also editing and then taking notes and then recording these recaps and stuff like that. So it is a lot of time. I love doing it because I am deconstructing and this is very helpful to me. But when people support me and they go, hey, we enjoy this. This is really, really great. Or when I do lives and people do super chats and things like that, it's very validating and I appreciate it. So thank you all for your support. Thank you for watching, commenting, subscribing, liking the videos. Even just doing that is super huge for me. So I really do appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. So we'll see you next time. Bye.